He was just another officer on a lonely road until he wasn't. No body, no van, no goodbye. Only the silence he left behind. He drove down a road that should have led him home. Instead, it led him into history. And into the ground. The wind moved like a whisper, dragging itself across the brittle grass of a long-forgotten Texas field. There was no music to it, no birds, no crickets, no distant highway rumble. Just the low hum of heat pressing down on cracked earth. Before we go deeper into the strange disappearance of Deputy Mark Hadley and the van that was never found, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep digging into stories like this, where the truth lies buried beneath years of silence and dust. Every subscription brings us closer to uncovering what time tried to erase. It may seem small, but it means everything to us. Thank you. The kind of silence that felt like it had weight. Nothing lived here now. Not really. Just thorns, rust, and roots that clawed their way through dust and time. 17 years ago, this was just another stretch of rural nowhere. A place you'd pass through without remembering. The kind of land where maps bleed into beige, where even the road forgets its name. But something had remembered. Something had waited. It wasn't the rain that uncovered the truth. Or the authorities. Or time. It was a rusted tractor blade biting into the soil, jolting to a stop with a sound that didn't belong, a metallic crack, followed by something softer, something wrong. The farmer climbed down, cursing at first. Then he saw the bone. And just like that, the silence broke. For nearly 2 decades, no one had spoken Mark Hadley's name in anything louder than a prayer or a drunk apology. Deputy Hadley, 34 years old, husband, father of one, missing in uniform. Last seen driving a patrol van along County Road 17. Last heard over the radio at 11:46 p.m. Requesting a status check on an abandoned pickup by the barbed wire fence near Oat Hill. Nothing since. No van. No body. Just the sound of nothing. There had been searches, of course, flyers, dogs, volunteers combing the brush in high-vis vests and snake boots. The kind of search parties that looked determined on the evening news and defeated by the next sunrise. Some said he ran. Others whispered darker things, affairs, debts, enemies in uniform. The official line: disappearance during active duty. Case open. Case cold. The field never made the news. Until now. The skeleton was partial. Caked in mud, bleached by time. There were signs of disturbance, like someone had buried him shallow and forgotten, or hadn't meant for him to be found at all. A glint of silver in the dirt caught the farmer's eye. A flattened badge. Nearby, a spent pen, warped by heat. A service belt. No gun. It shouldn't have been possible. This area had been worked, walked, turned over more than once. Nothing had ever come up, but now, 17 years later, the earth had given something back. And no one knew what it meant. The sheriff who took the call didn't speak at first. Just held the badge in his gloved hands, staring at the number. It matched. Mark Hadley. As if time had folded in on itself and opened a wound too old to heal. The press would come. The cameras would roll. The town would remember what it tried to forget. But for now, there was just the wind, the empty field, and a silence that wasn't quite silence anymore. Mark Hadley wasn't the kind of man you noticed in a crowd. He wasn't loud. He didn't swagger. He didn't carry stories the way some officers did, tales of foot chases, bar fights. The night someone pulled a knife outside the diner. He just did his job. Quietly, thoroughly, day after day. He was 34 when he disappeared. A deputy in a small, understaffed department tucked into the spine of rural Texas. His personnel file, still gathering dust in a drawer beneath the county clerk's desk, lists the basics. Brown hair, 5'10", commendations for diligence and temperament, no complaints. No misconduct. His handwriting was careful. His uniform was always clean. People who knew him, if you could call it that, remember him in fragments. The way he parked far from the gas station pump so others could get in easier. How he nodded instead of waving. How he used to stop by the animal shelter on Thursdays to feed the strays when the staff went home early. Nothing dramatic, nothing that begged attention. Just a steady presence, like the hum of a refrigerator only noticed when it was gone. His last patrol was on a Wednesday. The air that night was thick with August heat. The kind that clings to your skin and dulls the sound of tires on gravel. He radioed in at 6:03 p.m., marking the start of his shift. Assigned route, County Road 17 to County Line 40, loop through the old oil fields, then a sweep of the abandoned trailers west of Sand Creek. He followed it to the letter. At 8:17 p.m., he reported a minor traffic stop. A busted taillight on a red Ford driver warned, not cited. At 9:42 p.m., he passed the gas station on mile 12. Cameras caught the van. He didn't go in. Just circled slowly and moved on. Routine. Predictable. At 11:46 p.m., a final call. His voice was calm, almost drowsy. Checking out possible abandoned vehicle, Oat Hill fence line. No stress, no urgency. Then, silence. No one knew he was gone until morning. His van never made it back to the lot. Dispatch tried his radio at 3:12 a.m. No response. By dawn, another deputy drove his route, expecting a flat tire, a missed call, maybe even a minor injury. But there was nothing. No van, no sign of a struggle. The fence line looked untouched. The road was empty. The earth, dry and hard. Back then, the department chalked it up to stress. Some said Mark had been distant, quiet in a different way. His wife mentioned he hadn't been sleeping well. He'd started taking long walks after dinner. Not unusual, but not normal either. His boots were always muddy in the morning. But there were no obvious reasons. No life insurance spike. No open complaints. No family history of mental illness. He didn't leave a note. He didn't pack a bag. Just vanished. The town did what towns do. They speculated, then stopped talking. His face faded from the corkboard inside the station. New recruits barely knew his name. Even his locker was reassigned eventually. Only the metal tag Hadley, M., was removed and tossed into a drawer, still faintly smelling of pine cleaner and old paper. 17 years later, the name still lingers in reports, buried beneath layers of dust and indifference. Deputy Mark Hadley, 34, last seen near Oat Hill, still missing until now. It began like any other shift. The kind of evening that slips through memory because nothing in it demands to be remembered. The 13th of August, 2006. A Sunday. The sky had that dry, yellow-orange haze that clung to the end of summer like a film of dust on glass. In the dispatch logs, the sun dipped at 8:19 p.m., but the heat never left. Mark Hadley signed in just after 6. He arrived early, like always. Not because he had to, but because it gave him time to adjust. The station was quiet, the hum of the vending machine louder than the chatter between officers. Mark poured himself a cup of burnt coffee, black, and took a seat near the window. He looked out over the lot, watching the wind tug lazily at the corner of an old tarp, covering a confiscated dirt bike. He didn't say much. He never did. At 6:03 p.m., he radioed dispatch. Unit 12 en route, Route 3. His voice was steady, calm, a voice used to routine. His assigned loop was standard County Road 17 down to the county line, then a lazy arc past the old quarry and back through Sand Creek's perimeter. 3 hours, give or take. A drive through silence broken by the occasional broken fence, a stray dog, or maybe a teenager loitering where they shouldn't be. At 7:12 p.m., he checked in. All clear at mile 8, moving on. No hesitation, no tension. Just a deputy doing his job on a quiet stretch of forgotten road. At 8:17 p.m., another log. A Ford pickup with a cracked taillight. No citation issued. Driver warned, he said. The driver, an older man named Glenn Callahan, would later say Mark seemed normal. Polite, tired, maybe. but not in a way that stood out. He was just doing his job, Glenn recalled. Didn't even take his hand off the flashlight. At 9:42 p.m., Mark's van passed the Circle K on mile 12. Security footage caught him circling the lot once before moving on. He didn't go inside. The clerk on duty didn't even notice him. Between 10 and 11 p.m., he drove through the back roads near the oil fields. Nothing logged. No calls placed. A blank window in the timeline, unremarkable and quiet. At 11:46 p.m., his final transmission crackled over the radio. Checking out possible abandoned vehicle, Oat Hill fence line. The voice was unmistakable. Mark always spoke like he was half listening to the wind. Slow, measured. That was it. No follow-up. No request for backup. No return. Dispatch responded. Copy that, Unit 12. Status check in 15. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 40. At 12:38 a.m., another officer tried to reach him. No response. Just static. By 1:20 a.m., the supervisor logged a missing contact notice. But no one panicked, not yet. Sometimes signals dropped in that part of the county. A dead zone known for chewing up radios like bad weather. They waited. Morning came. His van was gone. The fence line at Oat Hill was undisturbed. No tire tracks, no drag marks. Just an empty space on the road, as if nothing had ever been there at all. In the end, the day didn't collapse all at once. It faded like a light bulb dimming, flickering, then going dark. A routine shift, a familiar voice, a note in a logbook, then nothing. County Road 17 is the kind of place that doesn't feel like it was built so much as it just happened. A scar through the scrubland, long and narrow, curling lazily past forgotten ranches and skeletal trees. The road runs for miles, mostly straight, until it breaks into gravel and memory. No billboards, no streetlights. Just telephone poles leaning like tired sentries, their wires humming with the weight of old storms and older silence. In August, the weeds rise tall here, gold-tipped and brittle. They crowd the shoulders, spilling over like time, trying to reclaim what the county once paved. Fences that once stood tight and proud are now bowed, their barbed wire tangled with dry vines. The fields beyond them lie empty, no cattle, no machines, just the slow decay of structures built in better years. Tin roofs rusted through, barn doors hanging from one hinge, paint peeled down to wood gone gray. It was along this road, just past the mile marker that someone had stolen years ago, that Deputy Mark Hadley was last seen. No official stop, no dramatic confrontation. Just a brief call, abandoned vehicle, fence line, standard check, and then silence. To drive the road now is to feel the absence pressed into the land itself. Each dip in the asphalt holds water from last week's rain. Each pothole grows wider with every passing season, but no one seems to come out and fill them. The dust settles deep into every crack. When the wind kicks up, it brings with it the scent of cedar, diesel, and dry rot. You pass through it like moving through a photograph that's faded at the edges. Locals say it always felt off, this stretch. Not haunted, not exactly, but still. The kind of road where radios go fuzzy, where the sky feels just a little too wide, and the air changes without warning. There are no homes nearby, just a few ranch gates that haven't swung open in years, and an old school bus long stripped for parts, now lying half swallowed by the brush. When they searched for him, this was where they started. And where they stopped, no skid marks, no glass, no van. The gravel gave up nothing, and the grass had grown over any secret it might have briefly known. Dogs were brought in, helicopters circled. But the road had kept its mouth shut. 100 yards in any direction, and you're swallowed by mesquite and silence. The fence line where Mark reported the abandoned truck still stands, wobbly, rusting. The tire tracks they found turned out to be old, maybe days, maybe weeks. No sign of a struggle, just dust. And that endless, Oppressive quiet. Some of the deputies who combed that land remember the way the heat settled in their throats, how the sun felt like it was pressing them into the dirt. They spoke of walking in loops without realizing it, passing the same rocks more than once, the kind of terrain where a man could vanish, not with violence, but with stillness. County Road 17 doesn't give anything back. It just waits. And 17 years later, it was still waiting. The first search began before the sun rose. A few officers at first, then more, arriving in silence, their boots crunching over gravel and dry grass. Radios clipped to their shoulders, whispering half-formed sentences. They started at the last known location, the fence line along County Road 17, where Deputy Mark Hadley had made his final call. The patrol van was gone. No signs of a scuffle. Just a shallow dent in the dirt that could have been anything. A tire, a boot, wind. By noon, it was official. A missing officer. Uniformed bodies stretched into the brush, sweeping in lines across brittle fields and cedar scrub. The air was thick, and the sun showed no mercy. Dust curled behind every footstep. Every shadow looked like a clue. They searched with urgency, but also confusion. There was no point of contact, no confirmed threat. Just a man who had been there, and then wasn't. Helicopters came next, their rotors thudding like mechanical heartbeats over the desolate land. From above, the fields looked endless, uniform. The difference between a rock and a body was a matter of guesswork and glare. Cameras scanned the tree lines. Thermal sensors flickered uselessly. The Texas heat drowned everything in the same breathless haze. By the end of the first week, the search widened. Volunteers from nearby towns arrived with bottled water and folded maps. Ranchers on horseback offered to ride deep into gullies, canyons, the forgotten folds of the land that couldn't be reached by truck. Deputies, tired and sunburnt, trudged through thorned undergrowth, calling his name into spaces that had never heard voices before. They found nothing. No fabric, no blood, no vehicle tracks that led anywhere conclusive. They dredged a few shallow ponds, sent divers into stock tanks muddied by cattle and runoff. Even a psychic showed up one afternoon, invited by someone's cousin, insisting that Mark's spirit had called out from beneath the roots. She pointed to a tree that had been dead for years. They checked anyway. The terrain did what it always does. It swallowed their efforts whole. The heat turned scent trails to vapor. The wind covered footprints before the dogs could follow. Every hour that passed was a thread cut loose. By week 3, the search began to feel ceremonial. Something done more out of obligation than hope. Faces looked blank, sun-dried. No one said it, but everyone felt it. They weren't searching for a rescue anymore. They were waiting to find a body. But even that never came. Months passed, then seasons. A few leads trickled in: a truck spotted near the county line, a strange man at a gas station, but none of it held. The case file grew thick with interviews and photocopied maps. Deputies rotated in and out. New calls took priority. A robbery. A meth lab. The county had too few officers and too many fires to put out. Eventually, the search ended not with a statement, but with silence. The posters curled at the corners. The family stopped asking for updates. The field grew back over itself. Weeds took what little ground had been disturbed. The wind returned to its steady rhythm, brushing past fence posts like it always had. Mark Hadley was gone. And the land had made peace with that long before anyone else had. The blade hit something solid. Not a rock, not a root, something that made the tractor jolt, metal clanging in a way that echoed too long for comfort. The farmer eased off the throttle, the machine rumbling to a reluctant stop. For a moment, there was just the buzz of insects and the groan of old hydraulics cooling in the Sunday. Then, silence. It had been another dry season. The kind where dust clings to everything: lungs, lips, skin, and even the weeds give up. He'd been running the plow deep, trying to turn the hardened earth into something halfway willing, This field hadn't been worked in years, maybe longer. Bought in a tax auction from a man who'd moved to Houston and never looked back. No one remembered much about the land except that it never grew anything worth planting. He climbed down, wiping sweat from his brow with the same hand that clutched a wrench. At first, he thought it was a stump, or maybe scrap from old fencing. But as he knelt closer, brushing aside chunks of clay and splintered stone, the color stopped him. Not gray, not wood, bone. It was long, pale at the ends, but the middle still held a slick red stain, the kind of tint only clay could give, like blood baked into time. He didn't touch it at first, just stared. Something about it felt still. Too still. Then he saw the glint. A flash of metal tucked in the dirt, just to the side of the bone. He reached carefully, clearing the soil with fingers that had spent decades wrenching rusted bolts and hurling bales. It was a badge, flattened, bent near the edge. The engraving was barely visible beneath the corrosion, but the number was there, worn, but unmistakable. He sat back in the dirt, holding it in both hands. Rusted steel lay just beneath it, a buckle maybe, or the remains of a belt clip. A few inches further out, another fragment emerged from the soil. The edge of a watch strap, its leather long dissolved, only the clasp remaining. The bones stretched further beneath the surface, interrupted in places by root systems and hardened deposits, as if the land itself had tried to digest them over the years. When the deputies arrived later that day, summoned by a voice half shaking through a phone call that felt impossible to make, the field was already roped off. The farmer waited near his truck, hat in hand, eyes hollow. He kept saying the same thing. I thought it was just scrap. Just scrap. But it wasn't. As the sun sank low over the horizon, the red clay began to reveal more. A partial rib cage. A hip, vertebrae like puzzle pieces, twisted into unnatural alignment. The ground gave up its secret slow, as if reluctant to let go after all these years. They found no clothing, no holster, no radio. But they found a name. The badge number matched a file that hadn't been opened in nearly 2 decades. Deputy Mark Hadley had been waiting in that field the entire time. And now, at last, the dirt had remembered. 17 years is long enough for most things to be forgotten. Long enough for marriages to end and begin again. For children to grow up, leave town, and only return for Christmas or funerals. Long enough for the faces in a department photo to change entirely. For badges to pass to new hands. For a dusty locker to be reassigned without a second thought. And in a town like this, small, sun-worn, slow-moving, forgetting isn't malicious. It's just survival. When Deputy Mark Hadley disappeared, the town buzzed with theories. You couldn't sit at the diner without hearing someone say he'd run off, that he'd found something he wasn't meant to, that maybe he'd been taken by someone he trusted. For a while, it was the only thing people talked about. But days bled into weeks, and the silence around his name became heavier than the noise ever was. The posters faded, first taped to store windows, telephone poles, and gas station doors. Rain peeled the corners, the sun erased the ink. Eventually, they just fell off. No one put up new ones. No one noticed when the last one disappeared entirely. His wife moved away after the 2nd year. Quietly, no announcement. The house sat empty for a while, until someone from Odessa bought it for cheap and turned it into a rental. A new family moved in, unaware that the front porch once held a deputy's boots every evening at 6:30 sharp. They painted the siding pale blue, planted a lemon tree in the yard. The tree never bore fruit. The sheriff's department stopped holding anniversary searches after year 5. Not officially, there was still a file, still a box marked Hadley, M. But the urgency had vanished. New cases filled the board. Drugs, thefts, the occasional domestic. Time was a predator with a long, patient stride. The town's children grew up with Mark Hadley as a kind of ghost story. A man who disappeared into the dirt without a sound. Some said he'd been buried alive. Others whispered that his cruiser still drove down County Road 17 at night, with no one behind the wheel. But those were just stories told over campfires and under bleachers. No one really believed them. Not in the light. People moved on, but not in the way city folk do. They didn't replace the memory, they just tucked it away, like an old receipt in the back of a drawer. Present, but no longer relevant. The town didn't heal so much as it scarred over. A rough patch of silence no one wanted to press on again. And yet, some things didn't change. The road where he vanished was still avoided at night. The diner still left a badge sticker by the register, half faded, unreadable, but never peeled off. And every now and then, when the wind blew a certain way through the canyons, someone would remember. Not in words. Just in the way their gaze drifted out past the fields, to where the land folded in on itself, quiet and watching. 17 seasons came and went. Rain, drought, fire, frost. But the earth never said a word. Until it did. The bones did not scatter. That was the first thing the forensics team noticed when they arrived. After 17 years in an open field, you would expect chaos, displacement by scavengers, fractures from weather, a jigsaw puzzle smeared across the soil. But this skeleton had stayed in place. Long bones aligned, spine gently curved, skull tilted slightly, as if in rest. The earth hadn't disrupted it. It had cradled it. The site was cordoned off within hours. The sun bore down in thick sheets, but no shade could be set up until documentation was complete. A team from Austin drove in crime scene analysts, anthropologists, a forensics photographer with hands steady from years of capturing the last remains of long-forgotten people. They took photos before a single finger brushed the clay. Each click of the shutter was quiet, respectful. This was not just a body. It was a question mark waiting to be answered. There were no animals, no ant mounds, no signs of burrowing. The depth of burial was shallow, less than 2 feet, but the placement was careful. Intentional. The remains hadn't simply been dropped and covered. Whoever put him there had taken their time. Arms laid at the sides, legs slightly bent. The badge, flattened and dulled, rested near the ribs. Beside it, what appeared to be the corroded remains of a leather-bound notebook, now more pulp than paper, its contents lost to time. What caught their attention most was what wasn't there. No service weapon, no flashlight, no radio, no uniform remnants, which wasn't unusual, but still notable. And yet, the bones themselves were in such remarkable condition that even the smallest toe joints remained articulate. The dry season had been long and unforgiving. For months, the area hadn't seen more than a sprinkle. That part of the field sat on a slightly raised shelf of hardened clay, a natural barrier against rain and groundwater. It had kept the bones safe, preserved, almost, by accident. Or perhaps, not by accident at all. One of the analysts remarked, softly, that it was as if the land had been holding him there. Not hiding him, exactly. Just storing him. The way the desert sometimes stores secrets in plain view, trusting that no one will look closely enough to see what's been left behind. There were no trauma marks, no clear indication of violence on the bones. But absence, too, can be violent. The absence of metal, the absence of debris, the absence of struggle. It left them with only questions, the kind that gnawed rather than answered. Had he been alive when he went into the ground? Had he been moved? Was this where he died? Or just where someone wanted him to disappear? Samples were taken. Soil, bone fragments, tiny hair-like roots that had curled around his ribs like curious fingers. Time had passed, yes, but not enough to erase everything. DNA would confirm what the badge had already whispered. But the questions, those would take longer. Nature had done its part. The sun had baked the soil hard enough to resist disturbance. The wind had never swept hard enough to expose. The rain had bypassed the site like it owed it something. Every element, every season, every silence had conspired to keep the body still, unmoved, undiscovered. It was a kind of precision that felt too deliberate to be chance, as if even the land had agreed to keep the secret until someone asked the right question, in the right place, at the wrong time. She doesn't cry when she talks about him, not anymore. The tears dried up years ago, somewhere between the second birthday their daughter had without him and the first Christmas she didn't set his plate. Her name is Claire now. Claire Reeves, remarried and living in a town 2 counties over. A quiet house on a street with trimmed lawns, where no one knows the weight she carries behind her eyes. When they called to tell her the body had been found, she didn't ask which body. She knew. She had always known. Back then, she was Claire Hadley, 29 years old, with a little girl who still called everyone Mama when she was tired. Mark kissed them both on the forehead before leaving for his shift that night. It wasn't anything special, no long goodbye, no last look. Just routine. He said something about the gas tank being low, that he'd be home before 2. She nodded, half asleep on the couch, reruns flickering on the television. That was the last time she saw his face. She says it wasn't the silence that told her. Not the unanswered radio calls or the fact that the cruiser never returned. It was a dream. The first of many. That night, sometime around 3 in the morning, she woke up gasping. In the dream, she had been standing in a field flat, endless, and the wind was pulling at her hair, whispering something she couldn't hear. Mark was there, but not close. Just a shape on the horizon, walking into the earth like it was water. She called his name, again and again, but he never turned around. She didn't tell the sheriff about the dream. Not at first. They wouldn't have listened anyway. Dreams don't belong in case files. Over the years, the dreams came and went. Always the same feeling. Distance, silence, and that unbearable knowing. She said it settled into her like dust in a drawer, always there, even when she wasn't looking for it. Friends tried to comfort her with hope. Maybe he ran, they said. Maybe he'll come back. But Claire never believed in that kind of hope. Not after the 3rd month. Not after the 5th year. She remarried when her daughter was 10. A mechanic named David, kind and patient, who never asked her to forget. He understood, somehow, that grief wasn't something you packed away. It just changed shape. He came with her to the field when the call came. He held her hand as she stood by the fresh tape lines and watched the forensic team work in slow, deliberate movements. She didn't get too close. She didn't need to. They asked if she wanted to see the badge. She said no. She remembered it well enough, the way Mark used to leave it on the nightstand beside the lamp, the way it smelled faintly of leather and pine oil. She remembered how he never let their daughter play with it, even though she always reached for it with sticky fingers. In the interviews, she speaks plainly. Not cold, just certain. He wasn't coming back, she says. I knew that. The second night, I knew. And yet, when they ask what it's like now to know for sure, to have an ending, she doesn't answer right away. She looks toward the horizon, eyes narrowed slightly, as if she's still watching him walk into the field. It's not peace, she finally says. But it's something close. The discovery of Mark Hadley's remains brought more questions than answers. Closure was a word tossed around by reporters, but anyone close to the case knew better. There was no closure. Only a name returned to the surface, and a timeline slightly less broken than before. One thing, however, remained untouched by the passing years, as absent now as it was 17 seasons ago: the patrol van. Unit 12, a white Ford Crown Victoria with department decals long since outdated, had disappeared along with him. At first, everyone assumed it would turn up nearby, maybe in a ravine, maybe submerged in one of the deep stock tanks that dotted the countryside. A mechanical failure, they thought, or a wrong turn into bad terrain. But the searches found nothing, not a single scrap, not even a tire track worth naming. The van was gone. In the early days, this absence hadn't registered as a mystery of its own. The focus was on Mark, on his voice trailing off the radio, on the lack of signs at the scene. But as days stretched into weeks, and as the field yielded no evidence of the vehicle, attention began to shift. Where did it go? Some believed it had been buried. A bold theory, given the weight of the cruiser and the silence of the land. To hide something that large, you'd need heavy equipment, time, and a plan. And yet, the area had loose soil in places. Abandoned farms with old machinery rusting under the Sunday places where a backhoe wouldn't raise eyebrows because no one would be around to see it. Others floated the idea that it had been destroyed, dismantled piece by piece, and dumped into different corners of the county. Scattered across junkyards, crushed beneath other cars, maybe even burned in one of the controlled brush fires that were common that summer. But there had been no smoke reports. No local shop flagged anything suspicious. The van, with its cage, dashcam, and department plates, wasn't exactly subtle. There was a third possibility, the most unsettling of all, that someone took it. That Mark Hadley didn't vanish into the field alone. That the person who left his body there also drove away in the van and made it disappear. That someone had the foresight, the knowledge, the calm, to not only silence a man but erase a vehicle tied to law enforcement. Some whispered that it was someone within the department. Someone who knew his route, knew he'd be alone, knew what questions wouldn't be asked right away. Others believed it was opportunistic, a stranger, passing through, who seized the moment and vanished with government property and a corpse to bury. But no theory ever held for long. There was no pattern. No motive, no evidence. The department kept the vehicle's VIN number on file, flagged in every national database. Still, nothing, not a sighting, not a false alarm, not even a junkyard inquiry. It was as if the van had been swallowed, not stolen, not dumped, just removed. And so, it became part of the myth. The van no longer felt like a piece of the case, it felt like a character in the story, a ghost with wheels. The white Crown Vic that never came home. Now, with Mark's bones laid bare and the mystery partly unearthed, the van still haunts the silence. Out there, maybe. Or nowhere at all, still waiting to be found, or never meant to be. It was the summer of 2008, 2 years after Mark Hadley disappeared, when the call came in. A man late 40s, maybe 50s, walked into the sheriff's office just after noon, dragging the smell of old diesel and cigarettes with him. Skin burnt and leathered, hair matted under a trucker cap, eyes that blinked too often, like they were remembering too much or not enough. He said he had something to tell them, something about a badge. In the mud. Out near the old oil fields. They took the report, of course. A deputy on desk duty scribbled it down between calls. The man identified himself as Franklin Boone, no fixed address. Known to drift between Pecos, Lubbock, and smaller towns in the basin. Said he picked up odd jobs, cleanup crews, scrap metal runs. Liked the quiet of the pump jacks, the slow rhythm of places nobody visited unless they had to. Boone claimed he'd been walking through an overgrown trail just west of the Parker lease. A stretch of rusted machinery and skeletal pump arms, long abandoned by the county and the company that once leased it. Said he was looking for copper wire, old tools, anything worth hauling. The rain had been heavy that spring, enough to loosen the topsoil. That's when he saw it. Just for a second. The glint. He described it as a badge, dirty but intact, caught in a nest of roots where the mud had collapsed in a shallow sink. Claimed he didn't touch it, didn't want trouble, just kept walking. But something about the shine stuck with him. He didn't report it right away. Took him months to circle back through the area, longer still to decide it was worth mentioning. And by then, no one was really listening. The sheriff's department had heard dozens of tips by that point. Most were noise. People mistaking shadows for shapes, bones of deer for men. Psychics offering maps. Children overheard repeating stories from their parents and believing them new. The badge in the mud story didn't stand out. No corroborating details, no evidence. A shaky drifter with sunburned eyes and a vagueness that felt more like forgetfulness than mystery. They sent one deputy out, more out of formality than faith. The oil fields sprawled for miles, machinery tangled in weeds, mud turned solid in the summer heat. No badge, no depression in the ground. Nothing. The report was filed and never followed up. Years later, Boone was found dead behind a diner in Sweetwater. Exposure. No ID on him but a bus ticket and a wrench in his coat pocket. No one connected him to the Hadley case again. Until now. Because now, 17 years later, Mark Hadley's remains were found less than 2 miles from the edge of that same oil lease. And the badge? Flattened, corroded, tucked in the clay, as if laid there by purpose or memory. The kind of thing a man might see once, for a moment, and never forget if anyone had believed him. But they didn't. And the badge sank deeper. The mud hardened. And a name stayed buried, just a little longer. Sheriff Eldridge sits at the edge of his porch, the wood beneath his chair groaning with each shift of weight. He doesn't speak right away. His fingers trace the rim of a chipped coffee mug, long gone cold, as if the right words might rise with the steam that once filled it. The sky behind him is dimming into orange, and the fields stretch quiet in every direction. It's been a long time since anyone asked him about Mark Hadley. He exhales through his nose, slow and heavy. Then he begins. "We should have done more," he says. Back in 2006, Eldridge was still sharp, still trusted. Wore the badge like a promise. But his department was a skeleton crew, underfunded, overworked, stretched thin across hundreds of square miles of forgotten land. There were no drones, no high-tech scanners, just a few battered trucks, some walkie-talkies that crackled more than they spoke, and a handful of men who ran toward trouble without asking why. When Hadley vanished, Eldridge told himself it would resolve. A flat tire, a busted radio, maybe even a choice the man made without warning. People didn't just disappear, not really. And especially not people like Mark, quiet, predictable, reliable. It didn't make sense. And when something doesn't make sense, sometimes it's easier to pretend it will. The sheriff shakes his head slowly. I told his wife we were doing everything we could. I believed it. God help me, I did. But behind the scenes, the cracks were already showing. They couldn't afford overtime. Fuel costs meant fewer patrols. The town council had slashed their budget that spring again. The department was down to 1 investigator working 3 open cases and half a dozen minor incidents. And then came the calls. The tips. So many of them. Eldridge remembers sorting through them late at night, eyes blurry, handwriting starting to blur together. The drifter with the badge story. The sound someone heard near the quarry. A kid who swore he saw a white cruiser in the trees. Each one logged. Each one either dismissed or delayed. We'll follow up, they told themselves. But the follow-up didn't always happen. He pauses. There was one night, maybe 2 weeks after he went missing. I sat in my truck on County Road 17. No radio, no lights, just sat there. I thought, maybe I'd feel something. Some kind of pull. Like the land might give him back. Stupid, I know. His voice cracks just slightly at the edges, though he doesn't flinch. Years passed. He watched new deputies come in, younger and sharper, unburdened by the weight of ghosts they never met. Files were boxed, cases were closed or left to rot. And Mark Hadley became a photo in a drawer no one opened anymore. I failed him, Eldridge says, finally. Not because I didn't care, but because I thought caring was enough. Now, with bones unearthed and the badge returned, there's no vindication in it. Just a hollow kind of truth. The kind that sits heavy on the chest and doesn't go away. The sheriff looks out over the land. evening light stretching long shadows across the field. "He was right there," he whispers. "All this time. Right there." The machine made a low, pulsing hum as it scanned the ground, moving in slow lines like someone dragging a finger through memory. Ground-penetrating radar wasn't something the county had in 2006. Back then, they barely had enough gas to finish a full perimeter sweep. But times had changed, and so had technology. When the bones turned up, the state sent in a team, and with them came the tools that could see what the eye couldn't. They began at the point of discovery, the shallow grave where Mark Hadley had rested beneath red clay in silence for nearly 2 decades. But it wasn't the bones that drew the most attention that day. It was what surrounded them. As the radar moved, it revealed strange patterns beneath the surface. Long, faint depressions, some in parallel, others curving outward like arms reaching. They weren't graves, exactly. Too irregular, too narrow. But they weren't natural either. Not erosion, not roots, something else. Something shaped by human hands or human choices, then forgotten and buried like everything else in this part of Texas. An analyst pointed at the monitor, tapping softly. "See this?" she said. "This isn't random. Something disturbed this soil years ago. And whatever it was, it stayed." They flagged 3 separate sites within 20 yards of where Mark was found. Each one told a story the earth had chosen not to erase. The remains of a shallow trench, half collapsed. A rectangle of compacted dirt the size of a vehicle. Another depression that followed a soft curve, perhaps a path or a drag line. It was like looking at the footprints of something enormous that had passed quietly and never come back. The field, from above, looked no different than any other dull brown with patches of rust-colored grass, unremarkable. But beneath, it held lines and layers that no one had thought to read before. It had always been there, this record of displacement. But people stopped seeing. They drove past it, worked it, ignored it. The earth doesn't scream for attention. It waits. Patterns like these happen when time is interrupted. When someone moves a body and then covers their tracks, the soil remembers. It compacts in ways that don't align with rainfall. It resettles wrong. It bears weight differently. The land forgets fast on the surface, but underneath, it keeps score. One of the younger deputies stood at the edge of the site, watching the flagged markers flutter in the breeze. He wasn't alive when Hadley disappeared. To him, this was history unfolding in real time. But even he understood what those patterns meant. Someone had come here with intent, with planning. This wasn't panic. It wasn't random. The forensic team took photographs, samples, notes. But they couldn't say for sure what had been buried in those other depressions. Maybe tools, maybe evidence, maybe nothing at all. Sometimes, the earth remembers too much, and sometimes not enough. As the sun began to set, long shadows stretched across the field, tracing over the same patterns that had gone unseen for 17 years. And for a moment, it was as if the land was trying to speak through the curves, the lines, the subtle dips in the surface. But all it said was, "Look closer." They found the notebook first. Pressed between the ribs and the hardened clay, its leather cover warped and darkened by time. Most of the pages had fused together, the ink long since bled into obscurity, but a few fragments near the center had survived. Those pages, smeared, fragile, nearly translucent, would become the center of the reopened investigation, and the center of something deeper, the unraveling of Mark Hadley's final thoughts. It wasn't standard issue. Deputies didn't carry personal notebooks into the field unless they had a reason. But Mark had always been methodical. A quiet man who preferred writing over speaking. Officers who trained with him remembered how he used to jot things down in the margins of his shift, report small observations, dates, times, sometimes nothing more than the phrase, "watch again," circled in pen. He had his own way of understanding the world, and apparently, in those last moments, he carried it with him. The forensic team laid the book out under controlled conditions, separating each usable page with gloved precision. 3 entries were still legible. 3 that hadn't been entirely devoured by the wet season years ago, or crushed beneath the settling earth. The dates were unclear, faded into ink blurs, but the handwriting sharp, deliberate was undeniably his. The first page began innocently enough. Notes about a traffic stop, a license plate number, a brief mention of a noise near the oil field, something metallic clanging after dark. Not enough to raise alarm, but enough to warrant writing down. The second entry was stranger. Saw the white truck again, it read. Same place, same time. No driver. Underneath, circled twice, were the words. Not coincidence. Deputies reviewing the page grew quiet. A white truck had been reported by another officer weeks after Mark's disappearance, seen idling near a line of dead trees before disappearing into unregistered backroads. At the time, it was dismissed. No one had connected it to anything significant. Until now. But the final entry was the one that disturbed them. It was shorter, more disjointed. The writing more frantic, less like the rest of his neat, composed script. He knew my route, it said. Didn't answer when I called. Something off. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. No name, no date. Just that. Then silence. It suggested someone had been watching him, anticipating him. A person familiar enough with his patrol to not only follow, but to do so without being seen. Someone who Mark knew, or thought he did. Beside the notebook, they found his holster, the leather dried and curling inward. Empty. No weapon nearby. No shell casings. No sign of a struggle. Just absence. The kind that spoke louder than evidence. And near his left hand, nestled in the clay, they found a ring. It was simple. Gold. Dented near the edge, as if struck or stepped on. The inside bore a faint engraving. Claire, always. It hadn't been removed. Whatever happened to him, he died still holding on to something human, something personal. A reminder of who he was beneath the uniform. Together, the items painted a picture, not of accident, but of intention. A deputy, growing wary. A man feeling watched. A disappearance that was never random. Mark Hadley had been carrying warnings, but no one had been listening. The logbook sat on a high shelf, tucked beneath a layer of dust so thick it turned the navy blue binder nearly gray. No one had opened it in years. Most of the records from 2006 had been digitized or boxed up, archived in the county's storage unit where files went to be forgotten. But after Mark Hadley's remains were found, someone thought to check the old paperwork one last time, just in case. Inside, the handwriting was uneven, rotating shifts of officers, each scribbling in their own slanted styles. But on the page for the 13th of August, something stood out. 2 names were written under the patrol assignments for Route 3. Mark Hadley's was one. The other, partially crossed out, was Deputy Travis Mendez. Travis had transferred out of the county over a decade ago. Clean record, no reason to look at him twice. But his name, sitting beside Mark's on a shift he didn't work, lit up old doubts like flares. The crossout wasn't digital, it wasn't time-stamped. There was no note in the margin. No reason given. Just a single black line through his name, and Mark scribbled in above it. Different pen, different hand, added after the fact. Hadley, by all official accounts, was not scheduled to patrol that night. It raised questions no one wanted to ask back then. Questions about who made the change, why no one noticed. Whether it was just a clerical mix-up, or something deliberate, a mistake, or a setup. In small departments, changes like that weren't uncommon. A deputy calls in sick, another swaps shifts. But those changes usually get logged, verified, initialed. This one hadn't. No one remembered receiving a call from Mendez that day. And Mendez himself, when reached for comment in the present day, said he couldn't recall the night at all. "It was a long time ago," he said. "But I didn't switch with Mark, not that I remember. Dispatch records show no alterations." Mark radioed in at 6:03 p.m., marking the beginning of his patrol as if it had been his all along. But something about it felt off now. Like someone had moved a single piece on the board when no one was looking. Had someone known? Had someone expected Mendez and been surprised to find Mark instead? Or was it the other way around? Was Mark the intended target all along, and the rota change simply removed any witnesses? The implications were heavy. Mark Hadley was methodical, quiet, dependable. Not the kind of man who would casually take someone else's shift without protocol. Someone had likely asked him to, or told him to. Maybe it came from within the department. Maybe it was just a favor. But that shift, that one unscheduled night, was the night he vanished. If it had been Mendez out there instead, would he have returned? Would the outcome have been different, or did the route itself carry the weight of inevitability? The truth, like the ink in the logbook, had already started to fade. But it left behind the outline of something bigger. A plan, perhaps. A window of opportunity someone had opened carefully, quietly, knowing that, for one night only, a man would be driving that lonely stretch of road alone, and no one would be expecting him back. In the end, it always comes back to the question no one can answer. Who stopped him? The discovery of Mark Hadley's bones, the missing patrol van, the altered rota, and the unearthed notebook had reignited every old theory, each more unsettling than the last. But none of them explained everything. None of them felt complete. Each one left something behind, an unanswered question, a missing motive, a silence that couldn't be filled. And yet, each felt close. Close enough to touch. Close enough to believe, if only for a moment. The first theory is the most straightforward. Ambush. That Mark stumbled into something he wasn't meant to see, an exchange in the dark, a vehicle hidden off the road, a person who should have been somewhere else. Maybe he approached too quietly. Maybe they panicked. Maybe they didn't. Perhaps it wasn't panic at all, but calculation. One clean strike. One deep grave. And the van, driven off under the cover of night, stripped or sold or buried far away. There are details that support it. His last transmission about the abandoned truck, the notebook entry mentioning the white truck again, the eerie pattern of shallow soil disturbances near his final resting place. Enough pieces to make the shape of a possibility, but not enough to know for sure. If it was an ambush, it was silent, surgical, a kill with no witnesses and no trace. Which raises the question, who would go to such effort to eliminate a deputy on a routine patrol? The second theory is stranger, that it was staged. That Mark Hadley disappeared on purpose, or that someone made it look that way. A planned erasure, built to look like he vanished without a sound. Maybe he uncovered something. Corruption. A trafficking route. A buried case that someone wanted buried deeper. Some believe the missing van was destroyed, piece by piece. Others think it's still out there, sealed in concrete, rusting beneath a barn floor or dumped into a pit behind an abandoned rig. Whatever happened, it required time, tools, intent. Someone who didn't just want Mark dead but gone. But the staging theory frays at the edges. Mark wasn't the type to run. He was rooted. To his family. To routine. To his badge. And no one ever tried to use his name or identity in the years that followed. No movement on his bank accounts, no hints of a second life. If someone staged it, it wasn't to make a point. It was to erase a person completely. Why? Then there's the third theory, the most disturbing. That someone inside the department helped, or worse, orchestrated it. The rota change, the unlogged shift, the lost reports. A quiet department, underfunded, underwatched, a deputy left alone on a remote patrol route that no one double-checked. A cover-up that didn't need to be perfect, just quiet enough to wait out time. If someone inside had tipped off the wrong people, given a schedule, even nudged Mark toward that road, it wouldn't have taken much. But why him? There were no known enemies, no disciplinary issues, no debts. Just a good man in the wrong place at the wrong hour. Which is what makes every theory feel more like a reflection than a solution. They don't solve the crime. They just tell us what we fear. That a man could be doing everything right and still be stopped. And that whoever did it, wherever they are, may never be found, not because the evidence isn't there, but because it's too clean, too careful, too personal. They buried him on a warm Friday morning, under a sky that couldn't quite decide if it wanted to rain. The clouds hung low and slow-moving, drifting like thoughts across the horizon. The town came out in quiet numbers, uniforms pressed, badges polished, old ties dusted off. Some of them hadn't known Mark Hadley at all. Others remembered the silence more than the man. But they stood there anyway, shoulders square, hats in hand, as the casket was lowered into the ground. There wasn't much left to bury. What the forensic team returned fit in a box smaller than it should have been. Bones, mostly. Some personal effects. The wedding ring, cleaned and set beside the flag that once flew over the department's entrance. No photos were placed on the table. His widow declined. "Let them remember him as they did," she said, softly. "Not like this." A single bugle played taps. The notes hung in the air like questions. The wind picked up just enough to scatter the first layer of dirt before the shovels could. And when it was done, and the earth closed over him for the second time, the people drifted away, back to their lives, back to their routines, back to the slow forgetting that small towns do so well. Sheriff Eldridge, older and slower now, gave the eulogy. He stood at the pulpit with hands that wouldn't quite stay still. His voice cracked once, then steadied. He spoke of Mark's discipline, his kindness, his silence. He didn't mention the van, or the notebook, or the theories. He didn't need to. They hung in the air between every line he spoke. "Mark Hadley served this county with honor," he said. "He was taken from us too soon, and we don't know why. But today we remember that he was here, that he mattered, that we failed him, and we will not forget again." People clapped, but softly, like they were afraid of waking something. The gravestone was simple. Just his name, the badge number, and two dates: 1972 to 2006. No epitaph, no final message, just the bare truth, carved into stone and left to weather. But the mystery didn't end there. There were still too many questions. The missing van, the last-minute shift change, the radar scans, the cryptic notebook entries, pieces that refused to fit together, like a puzzle missing its own picture. The investigation remained open officially. Unofficially, most believed it would go nowhere. Too much time had passed. Too much dust had settled. Still, some nights, headlights are reported out near the fields. A white vehicle moving slowly along County Road 17, stopping for no one. Officers check it out, but there's never anything there. Just tire marks that vanish after a few feet. Just wind moving through the brush like footsteps. The grave is tended now. The county makes sure of that. Fresh flowers arrive every few weeks. No one ever sees who leaves them. Mark Hadley is home, finally. But the ground still remembers differently. Like a wound that scabbed over wrong. Closed, but never truly healed. There are places where time doesn't pass in straight lines. Where memory doesn't fade. It settles into the dirt, into the air, into the skin of the land itself. The field where they found Mark Hadley is one of those places. It doesn't look like much. A stretch of dried earth hemmed in by tired fences and sun-bleached weeds. Nothing to mark it as sacred or cursed. But it holds something now. And maybe it always did. You can stand there in silence and still feel the absence. Not just his, but something older. Like the ground remembers every footstep that ever pressed into it, every secret whispered too softly to be heard. You don't see it at first, but the patterns remain. A shift in the grass, a soft dip in the soil, the way the wind hesitates just slightly as it crosses that stretch. These aren't things you can measure, but they are things you can feel. Some ghosts never leave the field. They don't howl, or knock, or drag chains. They just stay, quiet, patient, waiting in the roots and clay, not to haunt, but to remind. The truth is, not everything gets buried. Mark Hadley is in the ground now. His bones cleaned, his name spoken aloud again. But the story doesn't rest with him. It lingers in the unanswered calls, the erased name in the rota book, the badge in the mud. It lingers in the white truck some people still claim to see, drifting down County Road 17 long after midnight. Headlights on, driverless. It lingers in the patrol van that never turned up, in the silences between two deputies crossing the same stretch of road and refusing to talk about it. Closure is a myth we tell ourselves to feel safe. But some things don't close, they don't finish. They hang there, just beneath the surface, too quiet to shout but too loud to ignore. Grief becomes ritual, mystery becomes weather, and over time, the people change but the story stays the same. In town, life continues. Babies are born, homes are sold, names fade off the mailbox. But every now and then, someone drives past that field and slows down without meaning to. They don't know why. They might not even remember the name. But something makes them linger. Something pulls their eyes out across the horizon, to where the land hums low with the memory of what it kept. Because the things we bury don't always stay buried. And the things we forget don't always disappear. Sometimes, they root themselves deep into the ground. Sometimes they lie still beneath the fields, beneath the roads, beneath the ordinary hum of days. Not dead, not gone. Just waiting to be seen again. The field doesn't speak, but it remembers. And if you listen closely, in that silence where wind meets wire and dust clings to boot prints, you might feel it too, the presence of what was left behind. Still there. Still watching. Still part of the earth.